Welcome back to Forbidden Unveiled, everybody. I'm your host, John Doe, and with me, as always, is our resident expert on all things spooky and strange, Jane Doe.
Hello, everyone.
All right, today we're diving into a topic that's been swirling around in my head for weeks, thought forms. Have you ever had a thought that felt so real it was almost tangible, like it could step out of your mind and into the world? What if that's not as crazy as it sounds?
Well, we're about to find out. You've provided me with a fascinating collection of sources on thought forms covering everything from ancient Tibetan Buddhism to modern psychology. We even have some internet folklore thrown in for good measure.
That's right. We're going to untangle the history of thought forms, explore different cultural perspectives, and even delve into the psychology behind this mind-boggling concept. Buckle up, folks. This is going to be a wild ride.
Yeah.
Let's start with what might be the most well-known example, Tibetan Buddhism, and the concept of tulpas.
It's important to tread carefully here. The Western understanding of tulpa, especially as it's used online, has drifted from its original meaning in Tibetan Buddhism.
Okay, so let's set the record straight. What does tulpa actually mean in Tibetan Buddhism?
The closest Tibetan term is sprol, which refers to an emanation or manifestation of a Buddha or highly realized being. It's a way for these enlightened beings to appear and teach in the physical world.
So it's more like an avatar projection, not something anyone can just whip up with their mind.
Exactly. The idea that anyone can create a tulpa through sheer willpower is a Western interpretation that's become intertwined with the concept of thought forms. And that's where things get really interesting.
All right, I'm hooked. Where did this Western idea of tulpas as thought forms come from?
It seems to be a blend of Tibetan Buddhism and Theosophy, a mystical movement popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Theosophists were deeply interested in thought forms, even claiming they could visually depict them.
Would they believe they could actually see thought forms?
They did. They believed that thoughts and emotions had specific shapes and colors and could manifest as visible entities. This idea has resonated with people for a long time, even before Theosophy. For example, in the 18th century, the Swiss philosopher Johann Caspar Lavater believed that intense thoughts could manifest as apparitions visible to others.
So this fascination with the power of the mind to create has been around for centuries.
Absolutely, and it continues to pop up in modern times, even in digital folklore.
You're talking about things like Slender Man and those other creepypasta creatures, right?
Exactly. While obviously fictional, they represent the intriguing and slightly disturbing notion that shared belief amplified online could somehow give rise to a thought form. It blurs the lines between imagination and reality, especially considering what happened with...
The Slender Man stabbing.
Yeah.
That was a tragic reminder that sometimes these things can go too far. But what about mainstream psychology? Do they have anything to say about thought forms?
Mainstream psychology has largely avoided the topic because it's difficult to study scientifically. However, there are some interesting parallels. Think about children and imaginary friends. Most kids know they're not real, but what about the ones who don't? Or those who have incredibly vivid and detailed imaginary companions? Could that be a form of thought form creation?
That's a fascinating thought.
Cool.
What about hypnosis? There are stories of people experiencing things under hypnosis that seem to defy explanation.
Hypnosis is another area where the line between imagination and reality gets blurry. Take the case of George Estabrooks, a psychologist who claimed to have used hypnosis to create a group hallucination of a polar bear.
Hold on, a polar bear? In a hospital ward?
That's right, and he claimed it acted independently even after the hypnotic suggestion was lifted. It's anecdotal, but it raises some intriguing questions.
It definitely does. So we've got ancient traditions, mystical movements, internet lore, and even hints in psychology. Where do we go from here?
Well, this is where we step into the world of paranormal phenomena. We're talking about things that are even harder to pin down scientifically, but some researchers believe thought forms could be at play.
All right, I'm on the edge of my seat. What kind of phenomena are we talking about?
Things like mediumship, poltergeist activity, and even apparitions. Could some of these experiences be explained by thought forms rather than spirits or external forces?
So instead of a medium channeling a spirit, they might be interacting with a thought form created by the people present.
Precisely. Or a poltergeist might not be a mischievous spirit, but a manifestation of intense emotions, especially in a family under a lot of stress.
I've heard of that. There was a researcher, William Roll, who talked about extended personality in poltergeist cases, right?
That's right. Roll theorized that poltergeist phenomena could be an outward expression of someone's internal turmoil, like a psychic pressure valve. He believed that strong emotions could manifest as physical disturbances.
And what about ghosts? Could those be thought forms too?
Some researchers speculate that certain apparitions, particularly those connected to a specific location or event, might actually be thought forms. It's like a psychic imprint or echo. You've probably heard of crisis apparitions, where someone sees a loved one who is dying or in danger at that very moment.
I've always found those cases both fascinating and a little eerie.
They are. Some believe that those could be thought forms intentionally created by the person in danger as a way to reach out or say goodbye.
Wow, that's a lot to process. So we've got all these possible connections to the paranormal, but is there any way to actually test this thought form idea?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean,
Unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
why not?
Thought forms, by their very nature, are subjective and hard to isolate. They're supposedly created by consciousness, which remains one of science's biggest mysteries.
So are we stuck with speculation and anecdotal evidence?
For now, yes. However, some of the most groundbreaking scientific discoveries started as fringe ideas.
True enough.
Yeah.
So if thought forms are real, what does that say about the power of the human mind?
That's a question with profound implications. If our thoughts and emotions can literally manifest into beings that affect the world around us,
Well, that changes everything, doesn't it?
it certainly does, but it also raises some concerns.
Absolutely. The thought form concept can be appealing, even empowering, but it's important to approach it cautiously.
Okay, we're ready for the reality check. What are the potential downsides?
Well, the lack of scientific research means we heavily rely on personal interpretations and experiences, which aren't always reliable.
I get that. We all have our own biases and ways of seeing things.
Exactly, and there's a danger of becoming fixated on thought forms to the point where it's an unhealthy obsession.
Like someone might start seeing thought forms everywhere, even if they're not there?
It's a possibility. It could also intensify fears of demonic possession or other harmful entities. We need to remember that the mind is powerful and can sometimes play tricks on us.
That's a good point. I imagine it could be overwhelming to believe that your thoughts create beings.
Precisely. It's a lot to handle, especially for someone struggling with mental health issues. That's a sobering thought. So we need to be careful with this stuff.
We do. It's fascinating and mysterious, but it's not a game.
Well said. Okay, listeners, that was a lot to take in. We've
Yeah.
traveled from ancient Tibet to creepypasta, from philosophical musings to the potential for thought forms to impact the real world. But we've only scratched the surface. Stay tuned, because when we come back, we're diving even deeper into the world of thought forms, exploring the idea of them having consciousness and interacting with us in ways we might not expect. And stick around, because Jane's got some advice on how to protect yourself from negative thought forms. Grab a drink, stretch your legs, and don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Forbidden Unveiled.
Welcome back to Forbidden Unveiled. We've been on quite a journey exploring the history and potential impact of thought forms.
We have, and my mind is already buzzing now. Let's dive into the deep end. What if thought forms are more than just echoes or projections? What if they have consciousness?
That's where things get really interesting. When we talk about consciousness, we usually think of self-awareness, the ability to experience feelings and sensations, to make choices.
Right, look, my dog gets excited when I grab her leash, but she's probably not contemplating the meaning of life. At least, I don't think so. But thought forms are supposedly created by consciousness, so could they inherit some level of consciousness from their creator?
It's a question that has fascinated philosophers and mystics for centuries. We don't have a scientific framework for understanding consciousness, let alone the consciousness of a hypothetical thought form. But there are some compelling accounts that suggest it's a possibility.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of accounts are we talking about?
People who claim to interact with thought forms often report that these entities demonstrate independent thought and action. They might offer insights or information that the person wasn't consciously aware of.
So they're not just parroting the person's own thoughts, they're coming up with their own ideas.
Exactly. Some even report having conversations with thought forms where the entity expresses its own opinions or desires.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But how do we know if those accounts are reliable?
That's the challenge. We're relying on subjective experiences and interpretations. There's always the possibility of delusion, wishful thinking, or even fabrication. But it's important to remember that throughout history, many groundbreaking scientific discoveries were initially dismissed as fantasy or pseudoscience.
Good point. We have to keep an open mind, but also be critical of the information we encounter. So let's say, for argument's sake, that some thought forms are conscious. How might they interact with us?
In many traditions, thought forms are seen as intermediaries between humans and the spiritual realm. They might offer advice, warnings, or inspiration. They could act as protectors or guides.
But like you said earlier, there's also the potential for them to be harmful, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Just like any form of consciousness, thought forms could have a wide range of motivations. Some might be benevolent, others malevolent, and some might simply be mischievous or unpredictable.
So how do we know which is which? How can we protect ourselves from negative thought forms?
There's no one-size-fits-all answer, but a good place to start is to be aware of your own thoughts and emotions. Thought forms are supposedly created by consciousness. So if you're constantly dwelling on negative thoughts or fears, you might inadvertently attract negative entities.
Okay, that makes sense, like attracts like.
Exactly. Cultivate positive thoughts, focus on things that bring you joy and peace, and surround yourself with positive influences.
That's good advice in general. But what if you encounter a thought form that feels harmful?
The first rule is don't engage. Don't feed it with your attention or energy. If it persists, you can visualize a protective shield around yourself or call upon a higher power for protection, whatever that means to you.
So kind of like avoiding eye contact with the creepy guy at the bar.
Pretty much. And now, speaking of attempts to create thought forms, have you heard of the Philip experiment?
Yes, didn't a group of researchers try to create a ghost through concentrated thought?
That's right. In the 1970s, a group in Toronto decided to see if they could create a ghost using concentrated thought and visualization. They named this entity Philip. They held seances and focused their intentions on bringing Philip to life.
And what happened? Did they succeed?
They did experience some phenomena like rapping sounds and table movements. Philip seemed to communicate with them through these actions.
So does that prove thought forms are real?
Not necessarily. While the Philip experiment is fascinating, it's not conclusive. There are other possible explanations for the phenomena they observed.
Like what?
Some skeptics believe the researchers might have unconsciously influenced the results through their expectations or even subtle physical movements, sort of like a subconscious Ouija board effect.
Interesting. So while it doesn't definitively prove thought forms exist, it raises questions about the power of belief and the potential for group consciousness to manifest in unexpected ways.
Exactly. And that's the heart of this whole topic, isn't it? We're exploring the fringes of what we know about consciousness and reality.
Absolutely. So we've got ancient traditions, modern interpretations, anecdotal evidence, and even some tantalizing experiments. Where do we go from here?
I think the most important thing is to maintain an open mind, but also a critical eye.
Meaning,
We shouldn't dismiss the possibility of thought forms just because we don't fully understand them, but we also shouldn't accept every claim at face value. We need to approach this topic with both curiosity and a healthy dose of skepticism.
I like that. So if we entertain the idea that thought forms might be real, what does that mean for our understanding of reality?
That's the million-dollar question. It suggests that reality might be more fluid and malleable than we typically think.
So our thoughts might literally be shaping the world around us.
It's a mind-boggling concept, but a possibility worth considering. And if that's true, then it means we have a responsibility for our thoughts, not just for our well-being, but for the well-being of the world around us.
That's a powerful thought.
Yeah.
So where does this leave us? What's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think the takeaway is that the human mind is an incredible and mysterious thing. We're just beginning to understand its true potential, and thought forms are part of that exploration.
So we should be curious, but also cautious.
Exactly. Explore, learn, but be mindful of your own well-being and the potential risks involved.
Great advice, all right, everyone. That was quite a journey. We've delved into the history of thought forms, their potential connections to paranormal phenomena, and the possibility that they have consciousness. We've even talked about ways to protect yourself from any negative influences. But there's still so much more to unpack. When we come back, we'll shift our focus to you, the listener. What can you take away from all of this, and how can you apply this knowledge to your own life? Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back with more Forbidden and Veiled. Welcome back to Forbidden and Veiled. We've spent this episode exploring the enigmatic world of thought forms, those mysterious entities that might be born from the power of our minds.
We've covered a lot of ground, from ancient Tibetan practices to modern psychological theories, and yet it feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
It's a topic that really makes you think, doesn't it? And in this final segment, we want to shift our focus to you, our listener. What can you take away from all this? How can you apply this knowledge to your own life?
The biggest takeaway, John, is that thoughts are powerful. We've talked about the potential for thoughts to manifest as thought forms, both positive and negative. Being mindful of the thoughts we cultivate and the beliefs we hold is crucial.
It's like that saying, garbage in, garbage out. If you're constantly dwelling on negativity, fear, or anger, you might be unintentionally creating thought forms that reflect those emotions.
Precisely. So the first step is to become aware of your thought patterns. Pay attention to the stories you tell yourself, the beliefs you hold, and the emotions you harbor.
Easier said than done, right? We all have those negative thoughts that creep in from time to time.
Of course. But the key is to not let them take root. Challenge those negative thoughts, reframe them in a more positive light, and focus on things that bring you joy and peace.
So it's not about suppressing negative thoughts entirely. It's about transforming them.
Exactly. It's about shifting your mindset from fear and negativity to hope and positivity.
That makes sense. But what about the thought forms that might already be out there, the ones we didn't create? How can we protect ourselves from those?
That's where things get a bit more speculative, as we don't have a scientific method for detecting or interacting with thought forms. But many traditions offer practices that might help.
Like what?
Visualization is a powerful tool. Imagine yourself surrounded by a protective shield of light, or visualize negative energies being repelled from your space.
So like a psychic force field.
You got it. You can also explore working with crystals, herbs, or other tools that resonate with you and have protective properties. But the most important thing is to cultivate a strong sense of inner peace and strength.
So the more grounded and centered we are, the less vulnerable we'll be to negative influences.
That's the idea. Remember, thought forms are supposedly created and sustained by consciousness. The more conscious and aware you are of your own energy, the less likely you are to be swayed by external forces.
It seems like there's a connection between this and practices for mental and emotional well-being.
There is, John. The practices that promote mental and emotional well-being are often the same ones that can help protect you from psychic harm. It's all about cultivating a strong and resilient inner world.
It's not about becoming paranoid or fearful of thought forms. It's about empowering ourselves and taking responsibility for our own energy.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have a role to play in shaping our reality, both internal and external.
Well said, Jane. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of thought forms. We've covered a lot of ground, but as we've said throughout this episode, this is just the beginning.
There's so much more to explore, research, and understand about this fascinating topic.
And we encourage you to continue this exploration on your own. Read books, listen to other podcasts, talk to people who have had experiences with thought forms. Just remember to approach this topic with a healthy dose of skepticism and a critical mind.
And above all, don't let fear or negativity cloud your judgment. The world of thought forms is as fascinating as it is mysterious. Ultimately, it's a reflection of our own inner world.
Well said, Jane. And with that thought, we want to thank you, our amazing listeners, for joining us on this incredible journey into the forbidden and the unexplained.
We hope you've learned something new, challenged your assumptions, and maybe even had a few aha moments along the way.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to Forbidden Unveiled for more explorations into the mysteries of the universe. And as always, we want to hear from you.
Share your thoughts, experiences, and any lingering questions about thought forms with us on social media. We love connecting with our listeners.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that sense of wonder alive. This is Forbidden Unveiled signing off.